Welcome to the First Property Buyer Show, your go-to podcast for expert advice, market insights, and real-life stories to help you buy your first home with confidence.
Hello and welcome to the First Property Buyer Show, the podcast that is with you every step of the way during your property journey. I'm Emilie Lauer, Deputy Editor here at Momentum Media, and today we are talking about strategies in property investment and how can strategies make or break your future portfolio. For that, I am joined once again with an expert, founder and buyer agent at First Brick Property, Kyrillos Mansour. Hey Kyrillos, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Nice to be here.
Well, I think today we are tackling a big one.
Yeah.
We are tackling strategies. And I found out when you are starting your first property journey, like whether you are going to buy an investment or an owner occupier, you keep on hearing that word. Oh, what's your strategy? You need a strategy. Okay, what the hell is a strategy?
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I think especially people who are first starting out in the, whether they're buying their own home or whether they're buying an investment property, and they start researching and they go onto Google or whatnot, and the word strategy keeps popping up. I found that when I started myself, 10 years ago, I was like trying to figure out what do I buy, and everything just kept saying strategy, but no one actually told you what strategy was or how do you build a strategy
one, yeah.
or figure it out. And everything, you need a strategy, and there's so many strategies for so many circumstances, and it's always going to be very personal to someone's situation. Everyone is different, and even just before we started recording, we were talking about different cultural influences from where people are from and whatnot, and so there's so many different things. But I guess to define what a strategy is, a strategy is like a roadmap to try and figure out where you are now, where you want to get to, and how you're going to get there. And so, for example, I was telling you, I came from Western Sydney to be here today in North Sydney. And so I don't know how to get here. So I put it on my maps and I followed the map. And that map essentially is my strategy for me to get to my end destination. And so in property, that end destination will be my end goal, which can be ever changing. It doesn't, my end goal when I'm 20 years old might be different to when I'm 30 or 40, but we have an idea of the direction we want to move in. And then that strategy is how we're going to get there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. That's definitely very clear and very understandable. And I think, again, as first-time buyers, when you do your research and you keep seeing the word strategy pop in, it's very intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think, having that strategy is definitely important, but how important it is to get that first step into that strategy right, and how do you really define what's going to be your strategy?
Yeah. How important, look, obviously strategy is going to help anyone on there. Like I said, if you're trying to go from one spot to another and you open maps and you start driving, you're going to get there quicker or be more efficient than if you just started driving with no idea which direction. But if you start driving with no idea and then along the way you think, oh, you know what, I should turn on my maps, it'll reroute you and you'll eventually get there. So it's not the end of the world if you've started without one, or if you're kind of unsure, but it definitely helps to have a strategy in place. I think the second part was to your question was how to build a strategy.
How to build one, yeah.
Yeah, I think the first step to building a strategy is to know where you're going and what the end goal is. And I mean, with our clients, for example, we always ask them, what's your end goal? And most people don't know what the end goal is, which is okay, because it changes. But people have some sort of idea of where they want to be. Some people, it's financial freedom. They want to completely be able to stop working. And then we can, define that, and ask certain, and kind of narrow it down around that. Okay, what age, how much money do you need, etc. Some people, it's, I just want to be able to have an investment property for each of my children so that, I can pass that on to them when I move on. Some people, it's, I just want one property as security so I don't feel like I'm tied to my job or I'm creating money in the background. And some people, I never want to invest. People are really happy not to invest, and they just want to buy their own home, and then make their home lovely and bigger and better and whatnot. But having an idea of where you want to end up or what your end goal is the first step to building a strategy. If we don't know where we're going, you can't input anything into the maps to tell you where you're going. So I think that's step one on how to build a strategy. Once you know that, it's then sort of looking at where you are now and thinking, okay, if I want to go there to this destination, which is my end goal, how am I going to get there? And let's say, for hypothetical, the end goal was to be able to retire retire early, and not have to worry about income. Okay, if we don't want to worry about income, that means we have to be generating income from our properties. Okay, how much income do I want to generate? Let's call it $100,000. If I want to generate $100,000 from property, how do I do that? Okay, if we average yield of 5% across my portfolio, some will be less, some will be higher. 5% on 100 plus maintenance, I don't know, works out to be $2.5 million of property paid off. Okay, now I know how much property I need to have paid off to get there. Okay, how do I buy properties of $2.5 million? Well, I don't need to buy $2.5 million of property. The value needs to be that. So if I bought 3 properties for $500,000 each, for example, that's a $1.5 million portfolio. And then if I just let it do its thing and let time take care of it, if I buy in the right spots, over time it'll be valued at $2.5 million, hopefully, if you buy the right locations. And then you're paying off your debt. Maybe you buy a 4th property with the idea to sell that one later on to pay off debt on the other ones. And then you got this paid off portfolio, and all of a sudden I'm making $100,000 passive. Obviously it sounds very simple in that little sentence.
It does sound very simple. I was going to say, it doesn't sound that's unachievable,
And a lot of the times people's goals are not unachievable. It's just, but without this strategy that we all keep talking about, it feels like it. Because again, if you get into your car and you start driving, well, getting to North Sydney from, Liverpool does seem unachievable if I have no guidance of which way I'm going. But that's essentially how you would build the strategy.
Look, I found that when I was looking for my first property, and that was the first step that we needed to do with my fiance, was, I guess, to decide whether we will go as an owner-occupier or as a rent-investor. And I feel that's basically the first step that's going to determine your strategy nowadays in Australia. How will the strategies that you're, going to approach as first home buyer, how is that strategy going to shift, whether you're going as an owner-occupier or whether you're going to as a rent-investor?
Yeah, for sure. I think the biggest shift or the biggest difference is from a lending perspective. We are all kind of, working underneath the rules of the banks because they're the ones paying for the property. And so we have to understand the difference if I'm buying my home first, what does it mean from the bank's perspective? Or if I'm investing first, what does it mean from the bank's perspective? Now, if I buy a home to live in, that home doesn't pay me any rent. That home doesn't give me any tax deductions. The mortgage is 100% being paid by myself. And so if I buy a home and then I want to invest later, when the bank looks at my current levels of debt and income, etc., I earn X amount of money, call it 100,000, and then my property costs me whatever it is, $5,000 a month in mortgage repayments, which is $60,000. So the bank says, okay, you earn 100, your home costs you 60,000, you have 40,000 left. What can you afford? Okay, we'll give you money based off that. If you buy an investment first, well, your investment property, your tenant pays rent, you get tax deductions, and of course you're paying for it as well. And so again, your mortgage repayments might be 5,000 a month, exactly the same. So 60,000 a year. Your tenant might be paying 2,500 a month, so half of that. So you've got $30,000 essentially, that you have to pay from your pocket. And then whatever deductions you may receive, say another $10,000 worth of deductions. And so you're out of pocket 20,000. And so your 100,000 minus 20,000 is now 80,000. Obviously, this is, easy examples. But then the bank says, okay, well, now we have $80,000 to play with for your next property. And so that's the biggest difference, I would say, in how it affects whether you start here or there, or how it affects your future purchases, is that what we find is people who invest first, obviously in that scenario, I didn't take into account if I bought an investment property rather than a home, I also have to pay rent.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be 80,000, it could be 60,000 or whatever. But what we find is people who invest first have a easier time borrowing money after, because their home that they don't own would have taken a larger chunk of money from their income. That's not to say it's impossible or a bad decision. It's just different, and people have to understand the difference. And we have a lot of people who love to buy their home first and then invest, and we have a lot of people that are happy to invest first and buy their home after. And everyone has to do what they're comfortable with. People who want to buy their home first, though, we always kind of stress, if you're going to buy this home, this is your home for at least 10 years, right? It's not a home, because it's very easy, and a lot of people do this, and this is kind of a trap that people fall into, is they buy their first home, and like we we're just saying with our goals, when I'm 20, my goal is one thing. When I'm 30, 40, 50, it's ever changing. So when I buy my first home when I'm 25 or 30, whatever age you are, you buy this home and you're like, yeah, cool, really excited. And you're at, a level of earning in your role. And then 5 years later, you start to get to the higher end of your earning potential in your job. And so you're earning a bit more money. And you're like, well, I make a bit more money now, and now I've got a partner and I'm married and whatever, and we have dual income and we're both earning really good income. House is getting a little bit cramped. We can afford a nicer house, and then so buy a nicer one. And then a couple years later, they have children or whatever, or we maybe need a bigger house, they buy a bigger one. And so you get caught in this trap of, I keep buying nicer properties because I keep earning more money. And that's where no strategy kind of gets in the way. Because there was no strategy. It was, I earned money, I bought this property. I earned a little bit more money, I bought this property. And so you can definitely buy a home before investing. We would always say investing first makes more sense, because it will make it easier for you later. But if you buy a home first, that's cool. You just got to have that strategy if you want to invest, to know that, okay, over the next 10 years, this is my home. Doesn't matter how much money I earn. Like, obviously circumstances can change things, but the idea is that I'm going to now invest for the next 10 years, 2, 3, 4 properties, whatever it is, to set me up. And then later on, if I want to upgrade my home, I can, because I can sell this and take out the funds and go again, because obviously you're not taxed on your own home, etc. So I think the biggest difference is lending. It's definitely easier to invest first than buy your home later from a bank's perspective, because of the way income works. But if you are going to buy your own home first, it's okay. You need to know it's going to make it a little bit difficult to buy investment properties after, but you can work with it. But also you need to know that I'm not just going to keep upgrading my home every couple of years. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck in a loop.
You can't have it all.
Correct.
You can't have it. It just brings me, like, I think it's a very interesting point, and it's, very understandable. Like, it will affect your borrowing capacity. So what about if that first home then becomes an investment property?
Yeah.
What happens on that
dream.
on that front? Like, let's say you bought an apartment first, because looking at the market nowadays, housing, it's very, very expensive. I mean, to live in, so we've got like a very high median, very high, house prices. So let's say you buy an apartment first, and then you stay about like 5-6 years, and then in 5-6 years you're like, oh, maybe it's time for me to upgrade. I'm gonna use that apartment as an investment property.
For sure.
How does that work in terms of strategy? Is that something that is a good idea, or what's the downfall there?
Yeah. This is one of the most asked questions I get, to be honest.
That's why we do
why,
it.
you got the right
we're
questions.
educating people.
We get a lot of people calling us and say, hey, we want to invest, but we want to buy our home. What if we buy a place and then we turn it into investment? A few years later, we'll save the stamp duty thing with the first time grants, yada, yada. My black and white answer, and of course, every scenario is different, but my generalized black and white answer is it's not a good idea. And why I say that is when we look to invest, we are making decisions based off data, and we're making decisions based off what's going to give me the best and highest return for my specific strategy, right? If I'm buying multiple properties, I need certain returns to be able to do that. If I'm just buying one or whatever it is. And so when I'm investing, I'm making decisions based off numbers and numbers only. There's no emotion tied to it. When I'm buying a place to live in, it's an extremely emotional decision. And in fact, you should take no numbers into account because you want to live there and you have to be happy there. And so I encourage no numbers behind that. Obviously, you need to pay for it and whatnot. But in terms of, you're not looking at the vacancy rate of this location, and you're not looking at stock levels and building approvals and whatnot. You're looking at, I want to live here because I like this area. It's close to work or amenities, family, friend, whatever it is. And I can afford this location, and I like this property, and I like the way that the tiles and the painting and whatever. I have an emotional attachment to this location and this property. And so I made a purchase. No data was taken into account when I made this decision. And then, unless you get really, really, really lucky that the location you've purchased also happened to be a really good investment location, it's typically not going to be the best move. So not necessarily a bad move, but then we're coming into something like opportunity cost. Had I actually just invested, how much money could I have made as opposed to turning this into an investment property? And so when we talk about investing, it's really black and white. It's very data driven. It's a numbers game. It's, if I invest here, I forecast I'll make X amount of money over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever. If I invest, if I invest here, we know that there's going to be this infrastructure, this growth, and these rental yields, and this is how it's going to fit in the portfolio. And it's a very non-emotional decision. And when we're buying our home, it's the complete opposite. And hoping that location that I chose to live in is also going to be a really good investment location is hoping. Right, it's a hope. Unless you've done the data to find the location that's going to be a good investment and then decide I'm going to live here, that's a different story. But most people that are buying a home to live in are buying based on their own personal needs, not based on investment data. And so that's why we say usually it's not a strategy, because it's not a strategy. It's sort of...
That was my strategy.
I'm like, I know you told me this beforehand.
Now I've got the urge to go and double check the data for my property. But I think,
it can work.
It can
like
work,
I said,
yeah.
It's possible. It doesn't always mean it's a bad decision, but in terms of, is it the best decision? Likely that it's not, because if you think about how many suburbs in Australia, thousands and thousands. I think there's 15,000 recorded suburbs, but I think a lot of them have no humans in it. But
yeah,
there's a lot of suburbs in Australia. The likelihood that the location I live in is amongst the top 100 investment locations for the same budget I have is probably unlikely. It's also, it's a similar concept to people asking, when they want to invest, and we discuss maybe interstate or outside of Sydney or outside of your home city, wherever you are. And people are like, oh, but I know my area and I like my area, and that's great. But you're not going to live there. Yeah. It's an investment. It's going to make you money. You don't even have to like the property. But we also, when people say, but I know the area, that's why I want to invest here. And then we ask, what do you know? Well, there's a shops, there's a Coles coming up, and there's a Woolies and whatnot. But what does the data say? And they don't know. And so it's a similar concept. It's, I'm all for, when you're buying your home, you buy your home. don't think about the data, because you have to be happy you're going to live there, right? You're the one that's paying for it. You're the one living there. But when we're investing, and
it's data driven. Yeah.
Correct.
So how many strategies are out there?
Yeah.
And what would be the first one, I guess, or the better suited one for a first time, investor?
Yeah. Oh, there's so many strategies. People make up strategies all the time. There's always a new strategy, running around on the internet, or a new strategy helps you do this and that and whatnot. I think in terms of, firstly, there's two sorts of investments. There's active and passive. Active investing, hands-on renovation developments, they have their own strategies. Kind of leave that to the side today.
I will say, I'm sorry to cut you.
Yeah.
Do not go as a reno as a first-time buyer.
Yeah,
I'm
I
into
agree.
it. It is a nightmare.
Yeah.
This is my warning. If you have a little voice in your head that says like, oh, I can do it, I can do the reno, that was in mine.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Like, get out of this one.
Yeah. I
Pay
watched
for
the
the
block
premium,
and-
but like you'll be so much better off.
Yeah.
Sorry, go back.
No, for sure. I mean, I agree. I think anytime you do anything for the first time, keep it simple.
Yeah,
Right.
I
So
agree
you can
with
get
you.
your foot in, learn, because you're going to learn a lot of things. The first time you do anything, not even property, right? Like first time you ride a bike, right? Just keep it simple, a flat road, whatever. First
Yeah.
time you drive anything. And when it comes to property, it's a very expensive purchase. So keep it simple. Active investments they have their own strategies. That's when you're putting in your own time and effort and actually doing something to the property to make money out of it. We will leave that to the side.
Yeah, don't
Another
do it.
conversation for another day.
Don't do it.
So there's heaps of strategies under that branch. On the other branch is passive, where the idea is you buy and you just let the property do its thing. And so this is like an umbrella, and then within that umbrella you have lots of different strategies. Personally, I think all those strategies kind of fall under three kind of categories: high growth strategy, high cash flow or high yield strategy, and a mix, right? Everything kind of falls under those three. A high growth strategy is you're buying in an area and you think the growth is going to be, the capital growth from that location is going to be super high. You kind of neglect the cash flow because you don't really care. All you want is equity. That's that strategy. Then you have the opposite, which is a cash flow or high yield strategy, is where you buy these properties that are literally I don't know if I should. My brother-in-law called me yesterday and he was like, hey, I found these areas like 12%, 15% yields and which, so really, really, really high, like the normal yields in a metro. I think in a metro, across all metro cities, is probably lower than that, like 3.5 to 4-ish, 5 maybe in like WA potentially, but across Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, Brisbane, probably 3.5 to 4.5. And so he's talking 10, 12% is massive. And obviously my first question was it mining town? And the answer was yes.
Yeah.
And but that's a strategy where people chase really, really high cash returns and they don't care about whether there's capital growth or not. They just want the cash income. And then they use that cash and they save up and then they use that as a deposit and go again and again. And then the third strategy is a mix where you're trying to find the best of both worlds, and you know you're going to compromise a little bit here and compromise a little bit there. It is possible. A lot of people think you can't find good yield and good growth. Complete myth. All of the properties we buy typically land in that category. Now, the differences between all three, to build a portfolio, it's a game of finance. It's a game of lending, right? You have to make the banks happy because they're the ones going to keep giving you money.
Yeah.
And so you need two things to get money from the bank. You need to have a deposit, which is in the form of equity or savings, and you need to be able to pay the deposit back, the loan back, which is they call serviceability, which is either your income from your work or business or whatnot, and any potential rent. So you need income and you need a deposit. And so when we go down the capital growth only strategy, this is going to give you a nice equity. You're going to have heaps of equity. Property is going to go up in value by a lot if you pick the right locations, obviously, and it's great. I bought this property for 500. It's now worth 800 in 2 years. Happy days. I made 300 grand. Can use that as a deposit. But if I can't service that loan, the bank's not going to give me the money. And we have lots of people who come to us. They've already purchased property in the past. KM, I've got like $1 million in equity or 800 grand in equity. I bought this property yonks ago, and but the bank says I can't get money. Does that make sense? And I say, yeah. Do you work? Oh no, I'm unemployed. Well, yeah. It's hard to pay that, right? And so that's one strategy. And typically, people that fall into this strategy are really, really high income earners or dual income earners that are on high incomes. A lot of the people that we work with that fall into this camp, a couple, both doctors or dentist and a doctor, a lawyer, and like high income earners at the peak of their earning income. And so $50, $100 here or there a week on rent doesn't matter to them. It's indifferent. And in fact, the tax deductions they will get from being negatively geared helps them. And so they'll be able to keep servicing the loan because their income is so high, even if the cash return from the property is not. The second camp, which is the high yield or the high cash return, is based on a bit of a slower, I guess, approach where I'm going to get this really high cash return. It's safer in terms of holding on to the property and my repayments, because the rent's probably covering the mortgage and some, depending on the interest rates, of course. And so I don't even feel it, but the equity is not really there. The property doesn't really grow in value. I bought it for 400. 3 years later, it's 430, 440. It's not really moving too much, but it's paying me $500 a week or $250 a week after mortgage repayments, right? And so that's great. And so when you go to the bank in this situation, you have to have saved up a deposit, which may take years because you don't have the equity component, but you can service. And so a lot of the time, people that fall into this camp are the opposite. Really, really low income earners, for example, that just need the foot in the door. Or low budgets, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, lower budgets, not lower budgets, and it's a very unique strategy because it's very slow. And there's a saying, I'm sure it's been said on this podcast or somewhere before. Cash keeps you in the market, but growth is what we take out of the market. Like, we invest in property for capital growth. And so this strategy can work, but there's also another time where this strategy, or this kind of property sits in a portfolio where it's like, sometimes people will buy it at the end or like the last of their investment properties as a cash cow to invest and to inject cash returns after they've already bought 3 or 4 properties. So quick caveat before I go to the last one, none of these strategies have to ever sit alone. You can have multiple of these kinds of branches from the umbrella together. The last one is a mix, which most people fall into this, where you chase decent rental yield that you can afford to make the repayments and afford to make repayments on a second property, should you be able to get to that. And you have a decent growth rate, higher than the Australian average growth rate. So you're outperforming the Australian average growth rate, and you've got a decent rental return, and that gets you moving quicker than both of the other 2 strategies, I guess, on their own. But there is a place for each of these in a portfolio. Most people sit in the mixed camp, and so sometimes it doesn't have to be super complicated. And sometimes on the media and in the news or online, the word strategy gets thrown around like it's this, super complex thing. Sometimes it doesn't have to be super complex. Just, if we're looking for locations that are going to give me good growth and a good yield, well, that's a nice starting spot. And then if you do 2 or 3 of those, you're in a pretty good place.
Yeah, look, I think, you've made it very understandable. Like, I thank you for that. The listeners will definitely be able to get something out of it. It does seem like that the third strategy, the mixed bag, is actually like pretty much the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
So it might be something to look into. Now, how often should you review your strategy, and how can you switch strategies? Like, is it something that is easily done, or are you kind of locked in for a couple of years once you pick one of these?
Yeah, I think firstly, the mixed strategy is where most people fall in, but I think it's the hardest to attain, because it's really easy to find the 10% yield property, right? Just go look anywhere in the country where there's no one living there and you'll find it. And then it's easier to find really, really, really high growth locations with poor yields. It's actually hard to find that mix. So whilst it's the most common, it's probably not the easiest to find. But when you find it and you get it right, it's magic, to be honest. In terms of when you pick a strategy, how long do you have to stick with it, or do you have to stick with it, and when should you review? I think in general, every 12 months even. And a review doesn't have to be like complex either. You do your taxes once a year for most people anyway. So most of the time, you do taxes every year, and it's just kind of looking at where we're at. Okay, this property is doing this. What's our next move? Or you should be looking in advance, to be honest, and that's the whole roadmap kind of thing, is knowing where you're gonna go. But when you made that purchase and you've decided to go with this strategy, and then 12 months later, at a minimum, I would say, you can obviously do this earlier, but at a minimum 12 months later, having a look, okay, how has this property performed? You got to also know that property isn't an overnight thing. It's slow burn. And so there's no point. I always tell my clients, when we buy property, just delete the real estate app for a bit. Like, there's no need to keep looking every day, because it's not going to change overnight. And so just let it have time to do its thing. So over a year, it would have moved according to the market. And so you can have a look a year later. How has the property performed? Is it in line with expectations? Has it overperformed, underperformed? And does it still make sense for me to hold this, firstly, which it should, because it's only been a year. But then, how does this help me with my next purchase? 12 months ago, I thought this purchase was going to help me because then it was going to give me XYZ result and I was going to get to the next one. Am I still in that position? And so I think a yearly review at a minimum over the portfolio is beneficial. Of course, as the portfolio grows, maybe that 12 months comes down a little bit, because once you have multiple properties, 3, 4 properties, 5 properties, you should probably be checking a bit more often, because things will move a lot more. In terms of, can you change strategies? Of course. When you decide on a strategy, you're not signing a contract with anyone. This is just your thought process. But I would say you've made that decision to go down this strategy for a reason. 12 months later, unless something drastically has changed in life, it's unlikely that you need to completely change your strategy. Most of the time, the best strategy is to just keep buying decent properties in good locations that are going to give you a mix of both, and then do nothing. Do nothing is a big part of a strategy. There is a point where you have to do nothing, because you need to let the market do its thing. Otherwise, you'll keep accumulating debt, and there comes a point where you just need to let it do its thing. And also, properties, the longer you hold them, the better they perform, right? Compound growth. And so you need to let it do its thing sometimes. And so not being like knee-jerk reaction to, for example, you mentioned renovation.
Yeah.
People like, they had this strategy and then they watched the block. Oh, I should do renovation, right? Just stick to your guns sometimes. But of course, if something happens, unexpected child in your life, or you lose your job, or you get a promotion, or you got divorced, or you got married, or things happen in life. And so if the strategy that I had decided on no longer fits my purpose, or no longer gets me to my goal, or if my goal changed, then I can pivot my strategy as well.
Yeah, don't do reno.
Yeah.
But on this one, do not
should
do
call the
reno.
episode, don't do a reno.
Look, that's for a future episode.
Yeah.
Once my reno will be done.
Yeah.
Stay tuned, listeners. Look, I want to go back a little bit in time. That's a question I usually ask at the very beginning of the episodes. But
Yeah.
for this one with you, it seems easier to first ask about strategy.
Yeah.
What was your first strategy when you started, and how has that strategy evolved along the years? Because you've been investing for 10 years now,
Yeah.
at least?
Yeah, correct. So my first strategy. So I graduated university as an optometrist, and I studied outside of Sydney. I studied in Victoria, in like a regional area. Not so regional anymore, but at the time it was quite regional. And I lived in a student house, or a rooming house, which was essentially a regular house that had multiple bedrooms, multiple bathrooms, and the rooms were rented. Like, you were paying rent per room, and then you shared the kitchen and you shared the lounge, etc. And so when we were there, I was like, this is a great idea. My landlord's cashing in. There's 5 of us, 6 of us, 4 of us, whatever. Each you're paying per room, and I don't remember what rent I was paying at the time, but whatever it is, $200 a week, which is cheap for me, but times 4 or 5 people, you're paying $1,000, and the properties are $500,000, to purchase. And the university's there; it's always going to have students and whatnot. So I was like, this is a great idea. So when I graduated, and I was still learning about the property market and how property works. And whilst I was studying, to be honest, I kind of neglected my optometry, and everything was property for me. Like, I was so consumed by it. My dad sent me a book from a seminar he went to about property, and I read it, and I was like, this is my life now. Don't worry about eyes. I don't care about people's eyes. I want to know about property. And so I consumed myself with everything. And at the time, graduating from uni, I wasn't on a high income, and for me, I was in that bracket of, I'm a lower income earner. I have the potential to have a higher income later, but right now I'm a lower income earner. I'm single. I need cash, and I need to make money from the property, and I want it to cover itself. And so I actually went into that cash flow camp, where I bought a property which was student housing, and I think at the time of purchase it was like 9% net yield. And so I was laughing. This property is paying me so much money. Luckily, to be honest, because I was very fresh and green, luckily the property went up in value as well. And so I ended up getting the capital growth. But the growth component, to be honest, was I had no idea. Yeah. I was like 19 years old when I graduated. And so that was a bit of a fluke. But the strategy was actually just get this cash flow property, have it pay itself off, give me an income, and then the next one I'll look for a bit of a mix of growth and cash flow, which I actually ended up doing. And then after that, continued to do the same, and then eventually transitioned into commercial. But that first property was very much a cash flow property. I was very aware of my financial situation. My income was lower, and it was about paying itself off, kind of low risk and high cash reward, high cash return. And I had forecasted it would take I think 2.5 or 3 years for me to save up a deposit from the cash to be able to go buy another property.
It's not too bad.
It's not too bad. And so I was like, if this is going to be a low headache property, then happy days. Luckily, there was capital growth that came along with it. When I look back at the data, the growth side of it was quite clear and obvious, but at the time I
didn't know. Yeah.
I was just looking at the cash. Yeah.
But I think that goes back to what you were saying before. The strategy needs to fit your needs at the moment where you're buying that property.
Yeah.
I mean, you can go like a little bit longer term, but again, the strategy can shift.
Yeah.
I mean, when you were 19, you needed the cash.
Yeah.
I mean, still good on you to buy a property at 19.
Yeah.
Like, I think median age nowadays is like 36, 37.
Yeah. I actually just recorded a video for our socials. We're literally on that, and it was about like not comparing yourself to other people, because everyone's running their own race. But
I mean, it was 10 years ago as well.
yeah,
Market very different.
Correct. Well, correct. The average age for first time purchase, whether it's an investment or home, is 30. I think it was 33 to 36, something like that.
Yeah.
So, yes, I was always saving money. I didn't know why I was saving money when I was young. I ran different businesses when I was young and when I was in university, and I was
Everything but optometrist.
Literally everything but optometry. And but yes, I was building up this like deposit, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it. And then when I found property, I was like, yeah, this is what I want to do. So that strategy fit me at the time. I had an end goal, and in my mind, the next 2 or 3 purchases would be this mixed purchase, which eventually end up being like that. But for that first purchase, it has to work for the whole roadmap, but also you have to be able to get the car going and start moving, which that property did.
Very interesting. What's the recommended weight? I mean, look, I think it's a very hard question to ask because it's very depending on individual circumstances. But average, how long should you wait as a first-time buyer? Let's start as a first-time buyer between buying your first property and then going into buying the second one and then the third one.
Yeah.
What's the average waiting time in between? Like,
I can give you 2 answers. So, like, in terms of a actual time period, I think our clients are typically between 10 and 16 months.
Oh wow, that's fast.
Pretty fast. But my answer to your question would be as soon as you can. Doesn't mean, and I'm not saying rush. I'm saying as soon as you actually can afford it and are in a position to do so. If I buy my first property and then 12 months later, I'm in a position where I've got equity or I've got deposit, I don't have plans to travel, I don't have plans to do anything crazy in my life, or I don't have a wedding to pay for, or a divorce to pay for, or whatever it is.
Yep.
I don't have things coming up. And I've got this deposit. My job's pretty stable. I'm happy. I'm not doing much. Nothing crazy is coming up. And then I calculate if I was to buy another property with this budget. So you speak to your mortgage broker, you get an idea of what your budget is and the repayments. And if I was to buy a property, this is what the repayments would be. This is what the rent would be. This is what my total income into my pocket would be after both properties now. And I've got a buffer in terms of if things went wrong, I could still live for X amount of months. If I'm at that point, then go for it, whether it's 6 months later or 12 months later. But if that is also 3 years later, then 3 years later. So the answer is when you're ready, not to rush it, but also if you're ready, then there's no need to lag it.
Yeah.
Because the market's moving without you.
Very fast, yeah.
And so the market's not waiting for you. The market doesn't care about you. Unfortunately, it'll just keep going. We have clients who call us or who have called us years ago. And at the time we were talking and it was like $400,000. I'm talking years ago. $400,000 to buy in Brisbane CBD.
Yeah, not again.
I think we were one of the first, genuinely think we were one of the first buyers agents to go really hard into the Brisbane market. And because I remember at the time when I was calling these agents, the agents were like, what's a buyer's agent? Who are you? Whatever. Yeah. Obviously not anymore. But those clients at the time were like, oh, Brisbane, I don't know, far away, Sydney. Yeah. And then didn't transact. Years later, they call and say, hey, Brisbane? Brisbane's long gone, for that budget anyway. And then we moved into the Adelaide market, same thing. We were definitely one of the first into the Adelaide market because people were still going into Brisbane and we had left already. And then people were like, oh, Adelaide, yeah, small city, yuck, whatever. And then, but the numbers, the data was there. And so the people that got onto it made heaps of money. And then the people that didn't, like, oh, I'm not sure. I was like, you have the money. You should do something. It, yeah. I'll think about it. And then years later, because when people say they'll think about it, they don't really think about it. They just forget. And then years later, they come back, that market's moved as well. And so the answer is when you're ready, to be honest.
Yeah, when you're ready and when you have a buffer. Let
Yes.
me ask a cheeky question. Let me see. What's your head at now? So you've left Brisbane, you've left Adelaide.
We've left it all.
What's your next?
Now we're buying in Bali.
I love it.
It's very much, when we say we've left those cities, as in the majority of our purchases are no longer there. We are still very active in Adelaide. We're still active in Perth. We are doing some work in Victoria, despite our dislike of their taxes and whatnot. But sometimes the data is strong enough that it outweighs the tax. But it's just very dependent on the person and their budget and their strategy, as we've been talking, because we've been doing a lot of SMSF deals recently.
Yeah, which we're going to have an episode on that very, very soon in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
And I would not to spoil it, but SMSF has its own regulations, right? And you have to have like a yield component to make sure everything is legal and self-sustained. And so SMSF purchases with a yield criteria, it automatically cancels out a lot of locations like Brisbane or Sydney or some of these higher priced markets. And so with our SMSF clients, we've actually just we've done a few in Perth, done a few in Adelaide. For other people, Adelaide or Brisbane still works. For some, it's Melbourne. We're nationwide, so it's very dependent on the person. So you gave me a cheeky question, so I gave you a cheeky answer.
I love it.
But because it's hard to answer, but I'm still quite bullish. The data is still very solid for the Adelaide market. I think is really good.
Depends on the strategy.
But correct, it depends on the strategy. Yeah.
Great. All right. Last question for me, KM. So we're talking about entry strategy, yeah?
Yeah.
How to enter the market, how to grow in the market,
Yeah.
how to build up a portfolio. Let's talk about exit strategy.
Yeah.
So what's happening when that property is not serving the purpose anymore? Like, should you, keep on holding? Should you sell? Should you refinance? What's the where are we at with exit strategies?
Yeah. This is a really good question. And I think I think people don't think about exit strategies or talk about it. Definitely online or when people do their research, it is even like this conversation. Naturally, your strategy conversation is around the entry point. So it's a very great question. And when a property is not serving you, was your question. And it depends when you say if it's not serving you, as in it doesn't make sense to be in the strategy anymore or part of your portfolio, or if literally the property is a dud. All right. If the property is a dud, we'll tackle that because that's a bit easier. If the property is a dud, essentially what you want to do is run the data and see, okay, over the next 5 years, 3 years, whatever, what's this property likely to do in terms of growth and cash return? If it's not going to be making you money, well, there's no attachment to that, right? Sell it, cut your losses. It is what it is. You took a hit. It was part of the learning process in real estate. Unfortunately, it happens, but you can get rid of it and then move on. Even if you lose money, it is what it is. You get it. It'll figure it out on your tax.
By the bullet, yeah.
Sometimes it has to be like that. In terms of, you've got a property that is performing, but it might not be the right thing for your strategy anymore. I would say, again, it's always a data-driven decision. So you run a data analysis on what this property is going to keep doing for you over the next 3, 5, 10 years. And then what would it look like if I sold and then reinvested into whatever else I wanted to invest in? And then how much would it cost for me to sell it and then rebuy and really take into account all your costs? Because I also think people skip over expenses and costs. Sell it for $1 million. We bought it for 500, made 500. Probably not.
Because you got agents fees,
Yes.
stamp duties, maintenance.
Correct.
You've got all of these ones, and you always need a buffer.
Yeah, solicitors. inspection costs. If you're selling it and you're selling it vacant, and it takes 3 months to sell, or you're paying 3 months of interest with no rent and whatever. And so really take into account all the expenses in terms of how much it's going to cost for me to exit, and how much is it going to cost for me to re-enter. So again, stamp duty, solicitor fees, mortgage fees, buyer's agent fees, whatever fees. And then what is that new property going to do for me? And then map it out 3, 5, 10 years. And if after mapping it out, you're ahead, exit, sell it, happy days. It is a numbers game. If after the time frame that you're looking to invest this new property in, your funds into this new property, you're not ahead, then maybe it's not a matter of selling. Maybe it's a matter of adjusting the strategy to kind of make it fit, or understanding that I am going to sell it and I'm not going to be ahead, but there's still a reason. It might not be to invest in another property. It might be to buy my home, which is now my goal, because I've gotten married, I've gotten kids, I don't want to invest anymore, I want my home, and that's okay. You're not going to make it. It's not a financial decision anymore. It's a personal decision. And so if it meets the new idea, as long as you weigh out never make a rash decision ever in anything, right? Put everything in front of you, black and white, pros, cons list, whatever works for you, have it in front of you. I'm very visual and I like to write things. So I would literally put things in front of me. I use a notepad and paper, old school. And if it's like, yeah, okay, I know I'm not going to make the correct financial decision here, because I could make more money by holding, but this is going to serve me in a different way. You have your answer, but you're making that decision as an informed decision as opposed to guessing, I guess. And that's always what we tell our clients is, for example, at the end of the day, your money, your decision, but we'll put all the information in front of you and you can make an informed decision. After we present all the information to you, if you still want to buy in your own backyard, buy in your own backyard. At least you know you're not making as much money as you could. Most people don't tend to do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. I think that was a very insightful conversation. I'm sure people will get some strategy tips out of this one. Kyrillos, we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed this a lot. Hopefully someone takes anything out of it. And
100%.
Love to be back again.
Well, that's all we have time for today, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the First Property Buyer Show. Stay tuned. Join us on our social media. Just look for the First Property Buyer handle on Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube. We even on Facebook, I think. In the meantime, bye for now.
The information featured in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into consideration your financial situation or individual needs and should not be relied upon. Before making any investment, insurance, tax, property or financial planning decision, you should consult a licensed professional who can advise whether your decision is appropriate for you. Guests appearing on this podcast may have a commercial relationship with the companies mentioned.